contribute on this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, it is not in doubt that the CDF fund has been of great significance in this country. Mr. Speaker, if you compare the monies sent to the constituencies through the CDF and the monies sent to the counties, Mr. Speaker, you will note that there is a marginal difference on how their money is spent. Mr. Speaker, the reason why CDF has been successful is because of its lean management. And Mr. Speaker, that is why we insisted before this House that we need to clothe CDF in the Constitution, that CDF must be anchored in the Constitution, so that no one will be able to challenge the same before our courts. Mr. Speaker, CDF has assisted in terms of developing our infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what would have happened to our public primary schools, bearing in mind that the fact that our public primary schools and our secondary institutions are a function of the national government. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened to those institutions if there was no CDF. Because, Mr. Speaker, CDF has been of great importance to our constituencies. Mr. Speaker, but what I'm worried about is the report we are discussing, Mr. Speaker, before this House, is a report of the Decentralized Funds Accounts Committee in respect to the financial year 2013-14, and then 14-15, and then 15-16. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that a report that should have been discussed in 2018 is being discussed in 2023. Mr. Speaker, for example, I have read a very interesting recommendation in one of the reports that says that at some point there is a member of parliament who registered the assets of CDF, and in particular a certain vehicle in the name of the member of parliament. Mr. Speaker, I'm pretty sure that if this were to happen in this year or in the last financial year, then stern measures would have been taken against that individual. So, Mr. Speaker, secondly, I have read the report in full and in detail. Mr. Speaker, there is need for continuous capacity building of the staff of CDF. Mr. Speaker, you realize that most of the CDF staff are just employed, and most often than not, the members of parliament have a hand in the employment of those people, and of course through a competitive process. So, Mr. Speaker, these people need a continuous and a thorough training so that they can be able to be in line with the code of conduct of public service. Mr. Speaker, also in terms of uniformity of projects, we need to standardize the kind of project that we have. You find that different constituencies have different standardization of projects, so that if we have uniformity of projects in the constituencies, then, Mr. Speaker, there will be value for money in our constituencies. Mr. Speaker, but the biggest and the most critical thing that has affected CDF in this country is the late disbursement of CDF funds. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, there are projects that are pending in our constituencies. Mr. Speaker, those projects are incomplete. Our students, our pupils need to use laboratories, need to use classrooms, need to use the dormitories, but the same have not been ready for occupation because the government has not remitted the amounts of money that they are supposed to remit. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that is the biggest challenge that we face in terms of CDF in this country. Mr. Speaker, this House must take stern action, must take stern measures against our national treasury. Mr. Speaker, there is no reason why other government departments are fully funded, whereas our constituency development funds have not been remitted to the constituency. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, there are no funds for development that have been disbursed in the constituencies. For me, I think this is an insult to this House. It is an insult to our members of parliament, and that is why we must be able to stamp the authority of this House in terms of parliamentary sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, this is not an arm of the executive. This is Parliament. This is an arm of the government. Mr. Speaker, we have three arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. This Parliament is not an arm of the executive. And that is why we must be able to stamp our authority as a House. And the reason why the funds have not been disbursed is because of the way we have acted as a House. Mr. Speaker, we need to have a firm resolve in this House so that we gain the respect that we deserve as a National Assembly. Because if we become an appendage of either arms of government, then even if we ask for funds to be disbursed to our constituencies, we have lost our independence, we have lost our sovereignty in quotes, and therefore, even if we demand, we do not have that respect from the executive. So, Your Honor, we must stamp our feet and our authority as a House so that we have that respect. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that the problem we have is, if there is a problem on matters of CDF, the first person to be blamed is the Member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is very unfortunate. It should be noted that the Member of Parliament does not play any role in terms of CDF. The person, we have an accounting officer, and that is the person who should take the ultimate responsibility when it comes to matters of CDF. Most often than not, the Member of Parliament, with their audit queries, the buck normally, in terms of what the public perceives, is that the buck stops at the Member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, that is not the correct position. The correct position is, as CDF is managed through the office of the fund manager, and therefore the Member of Parliament has no role in terms of the management of CDF. Mr. Speaker, I also call upon the COCs, that is the constituency oversight committees in our constituencies, to play their role. Because, Mr. Speaker, the question is, who polices the fund manager? Who polices the officers serving in CDF? Mr. Speaker, the COC must stamp the authority and be able to oversight the CDF committee, so that they can be able to execute their mandate, or they discharge their mandate without any fear of intimidation. Mr. Speaker, we also still call for continued increase in the allocation of CDF. Mr. Speaker, we realize that there was a slight improvement in the formula for allocation of CDF. But, Mr. Speaker, you realize that the highest constituency in this country receives a paltry, around 165 million. That is the highest allocation that a constituency receives in this country. Mr. Speaker, if you compare the importance of CDF to the amount allocated, Mr. Speaker, there is a big difference. And that is why, as this House, we should call for an increment in CDF, because, as we have agreed, CDF plays a critical role, plays an important role, and of course that trickles down to the people who are on the ground. Mr. Speaker, so many children have benefited from our bursaries, and there has been no audit queries, so much audit queries in terms of bursaries, because the bursaries benefits most of our children, and for that reason, Mr. Speaker, sir, I fully support this report. I fully support the recommendation contained therein, and I believe that if the recommendations are adopted as they are, then we shall have a CDF that...
Honorable Toroitich,
yes.
It is very refreshing to listen to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Could you be rushing because you are running out of time? Because I would be keen to give you more time if you still have contributions to make.
Mr. Speaker.
More so, you know, that point you made on sovereignty of the House and how the audit process should be undertaken is quite relevant and refreshing for me. You need more time, or you are concluding?
Very well, Mr. Speaker. Maybe I can prosecute that matter.
I'll give you 3 more minutes.
That are raised in this House. Mr. Speaker, what I've said is... Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for adding me more time to prosecute on that matter. Mr. Speaker, what I've said is this House must stamp its authority. Mr. Speaker, Montesquieu was never wrong when he talked about separation of powers. And in this country, and in the entire Commonwealth jurisdiction, there is a reason why we have 3 arms of government. The judiciary...
A minute, Honorable Torotich. Honorable Lynette Jepchichir, would you approach the speaker, please?
Mr. Speaker, I've said Montesquieu was never wrong when he articulated that for a functional democracy, we must have 3 arms of government. Mr. Speaker, there is a reason why under our constitution we have the executive, the judiciary, and this House, Parliament. Mr. Speaker, and I've said once, not once, not twice, but severally, that this House is not an appendage of the executive. This House must be able to stand firm. This House must be able to prosecute its business without being directed by the executive. And Mr. Speaker, the reason why I've said that is because one of the critical things that a member of parliament must have in order to prosecute his or her duties at the local level is the CDF. And the reason why CDF has not been released to our people, to their constituencies. Mr. Speaker, it's a shame that 7 months since these members took oath in this office, CDF, development expenditure of CDF has not been released to the constituencies. And we are here as members of parliament, we are mum, we are not saying anything, yet this financial year has lapsed and no amount of CDF has been released to our constituencies. Mr. Speaker, it's a shame. And the reason I've said that is because this House has acted in a manner to suggest that we are an appendage of the executive, and therefore, when we want to question for our funds, we are told, see, you relax, you will get your money. Mr. Speaker, for me as a member of parliament, it's unfortunate, and we must be able to restate the sovereignty of this House. We must be able to restate, and so that this House can have the respect that we deserve. So, Mr. Speaker, for those few remarks, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to support this very important report before this House.
Thank you, Honorable Toretich. The Honorable Jared Okelo.